The old clock tower chimed twice, its bronze clangor echoing through the square like a death knell. 2 o'clock. Time for another cup of lukewarm coffee, and a silent prayer that Mr. Henderson wouldn't barge in, demanding to know about his missing socks again. It was a mundane routine, one I'd come to accept in my twilight years manning the lost and found at Grand Central Station. A lifetime of other people's lost things, and what had it gotten me? A front row seat to the end of the world, it seemed, because that's when the silence came. It wasn't a gradual fade, but a sudden, absolute hush. One moment the air buzzed with a symphony of the city, car horns, distant sirens, the murmuring hive of humanity, and the next, it was gone, snuffed out as if someone had thrown a cosmic mute switch and plunged the world into an unsettling silent film. My heart stuttered, caught in the uncanny valley between one beat and the next, like a record skipping a groove. The second hand on the old clock on the wall shuddered, froze. Even the dust motes dancing in the sunbeams seemed to hold their breath, afraid to move, afraid to make a sound, as if any movement would shatter the stillness and unleash something terrible. Then, creeping in on little cat feet, came the unease. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the quality of the silence itself, heavy, oppressive, pregnant with something unseen, something hungry, like the world was holding its breath, braced for a thunderclap that never came. I looked around, my breath fogging the dusty glass of the lost and found booth. Outside, people had frozen mid-stride, their faces slack with confusion, caught like insects in amber. A woman pushing a stroller stood paralyzed, her grip white-knuckled on the handlebar, the wheels locked at an unnatural angle. The world, it seemed, was holding its breath, waiting. A cold sweat pricked my skin. I wasn't alone. From the corner of my eye, I saw it. A flicker of movement. Something dark, shifting in the periphery of my vision, just beyond the reach of the flickering gaslights. I blinked, and it was gone. Just a trick of the light, I told myself, my voice a thin reed of false confidence in the stillness. But deep down, a primal fear, ancient and cold, whispered that the silence wasn't empty. Something was in here with us. Something watching from the stillness, toying with us, and it felt hungry. Then, as quickly as it had descended, the silence lifted. The clock on the wall shuddered back to life, its loud, obnoxious tick almost painful after the quiet. The city roared back to life with it, the collective sigh of relief almost tangible. People shook their heads, bewildered, resuming their hurried lives as if nothing had happened. But I saw the doubt in their eyes, the lingering fear in the way they unconsciously scanned their surroundings, as if expecting the silence to return at any moment. I felt it too, a knot of dread coiled tight in my gut, a sour taste in my mouth. The silence may have receded, but it had left its mark. This wasn't over. It was just the beginning. The rest of the day went by in a fog. Faces swam into view and out again, marked by the same bewildered fear that gnawed at my insides. Tried to lose myself in the routines of the lost, and found, sorting through a tangled mess of scarves, matching a lone mitten to its mate. But the silence lingered, a bad taste I couldn't quite swallow. Mr. Henderson shuffled in, his face, usually a tapestry of indignation, now pale and drawn. Didn't mention the silence, but his eyes, usually laser-focused on reclaiming his missing socks, darted around like trapped birds. He accepted a pair of mismatched gloves, his usual bluster replaced by a nervous tick in his cheek, a telltale tremor in his hand. Even Mr. Henderson, it seemed, was infected by the unease. Back in my cramped apartment, the silence felt different. Not the oppressive, suffocating stillness that had gripped the station, but a hollow quiet, amplifying every groan of the building, every tick of the clock on the wall. The silence, it seemed, had followed me home. Tried to drown it out, cranked the knob on my old transistor radio, the one I'd had since the war. Static. Tried the television, a flickering black and white zenith. Nothing. Picked up the phone, the rotary dial heavy in my hand. Dead. A chill snaked down my spine, colder than the draft whistling through my window. The silence wasn't just in the air, it was in everything. It was spreading. Sleep that night was a war zone. Dreams, vivid and cruel, plagued me. Faceless figures with empty eyes leering at me from the shadows. The clock tower looming over the city, its bronze bells clanging out a discordant, maddening rhythm, each clang a hammer blow to my sanity. By morning, I was a ghost haunting my own life. My reflection in the cracked mirror was a stranger, eyes bloodshot, face pale and drawn, a tremor in my hand that wouldn't cease. Considered calling in sick, but what was the point? What could be worse than what had already happened? What terror could the city offer that compared to the silent dread that had taken root in my soul? Besides, I needed to know. Needed to understand the why of it, the how of it, and somehow, the lost and found, amidst the comforting clutter of forgotten things and the steady stream of humanity, felt like the safest place to be. An illusion, maybe, but a necessary one. The world outside was silent, but inside the station, there was still a semblance of order. A fragile barrier between sanity and whatever lurked in the stillness. At least, that's what I told myself, clinging to it like a life raft in a storm. The morning paper lay on my counter, untouched. Headlines screamed about a citywide blackout, the words blurring into meaningless streaks of ink. Didn't need the paper to tell me the truth. My radio had been playing just fine when I'd turned in, and the streetlights outside my window hadn't even flickered. Just a normal, noisy New York night. Until it wasn't. Took a gulp of lukewarm coffee, the metallic tang doing nothing to settle the knot of unease in my gut. It was the not knowing that gnawed at me. The way the silence had just fallen, like a shroud, indiscriminate and absolute. Nobody else seemed to be talking about it, this wrongness. At the station, the usual morning rush had a current of fear running beneath it. People talked in hushed tones, their eyes darting around like startled pigeons, searching for answers, an explanation that made sense, that fit into the neat little boxes of their world. I saw it in their faces, the same bewildered fear I felt twisting in my own gut. Tried to lose myself in the routine, the comforting monotony of the lost and found, sorting misplaced gloves, tagging forgotten umbrellas, but the silence lingered in my mind, a phantom limb. Then, around noon, she appeared. A young woman, her face as pale as a bleached bone, clutching a tattered teddy bear so tightly her knuckles were bone white. I recognized her from the day before, the woman with the stroller, her face frozen in a silent scream. Her voice, when she spoke, was barely a whisper, rough with unshed tears. "It happened again last night," she said, her eyes wide with a terror I recognized all too well. "In my apartment. Everything just stopped." She paused, swallowed hard, her gaze darting around the station, as if the silence was a living thing, lurking just out of sight. "And I saw it again," she whispered, her voice breaking. "That shadow." Her words tumbled out in a rush, a jumbled mess of fear and confusion. I wanted to dismiss it, tell her it was just a bad dream, a trick of the mind, but I couldn't, because I'd seen it too. The conviction in her voice, the sheer terror in her eyes, mirrored my own growing dread. This wasn't a glitch, a one-time anomaly. It was spreading, reaching out from the station, seeping into homes, lives. Before I could respond, a cold wave washed over us. Not a physical sensation, not exactly, but a chilling stillness that seemed to seep into my bones, stealing the warmth from the air, the breath from my lungs. The air grew thick, difficult to breathe. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. "It's happening again," I choked out, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. And then, the world went quiet. This wasn't a blackout. This wasn't some citywide power hiccup. The evidence was right there in the terrified faces around me, the way the air itself felt charged, crackling with an unnatural energy. The young woman. I remembered now. She'd been asking about a lost stroller yesterday, crumpled to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut. The teddy bear, its fur matted and worn, lay next to her, a tiny island of innocence in a sea of growing panic. People were losing their minds, scrambling for the exits, their cries swallowed by the thick, suffocating silence. But where could they go? This wasn't a localized phenomenon anymore. A glitch in Grand Central's system. This was something far bigger. Something truly terrifying. This time, we were all trapped. The silence pressed in on me, heavier than before. A physical presence that made it hard to swallow, hard to breathe. The clock on the wall ticked off seconds that felt like hours, each one a hammer blow against my fraying nerves. My ears, desperate for any sound, any relief, began to ring, a high-pitched whine that only amplified the unnerving silence. And then, through the haze of fear and disorientation, I saw it. A figure, impossibly tall and gaunt, standing at the edge of my vision, shrouded in the swirling shadows under the gaslights. It was as if it wasn't quite solid, its edges blurring in and out of focus, trying to find purchase in the real world. I couldn't make out its face, couldn't tell if it even had one. There was just a chilling rawness radiating from it, a feeling like a bucket of ice water had been poured down my spine. My hand, moving without conscious thought, reached for the old brass bell on the counter. A heavy, reassuring weight. A relic from the station's grand opening, back when things made sense. Could it see me? Did it even have eyes? The figure took a step closer, gliding silently across the station floor. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and I squeezed my eyes shut, clutching the bell like a lifeline. The ringing in my ears intensified, morphing into a deafening screech that seemed to burrow into my skull, echoing the terror in my heart. Then, as abruptly as it started, the ringing stopped. The air rushed back into my lungs, cold and sharp, leaving behind the metallic tang of fear. I opened my eyes, my vision blurry, unfocused. The station was stirring, slowly coming back to life. Whispers, coughs. The shuffling of feet replaced the oppressive silence, a symphony of normalcy after the nightmare. The young mother was being helped to her feet, her eyes frantic, searching for her child. But the figure, the thing that had stolen the sound, that had stolen our peace, was gone, vanished. I was left there, trembling, clutching the brass bell, my hands slick with sweat. The silence may have receded, but the feeling of being watched, of something unseen lurking just beyond the veil of reality, lingered like a half-remembered nightmare. This was no ordinary event, no freak occurrence. This was something far more sinister. And I, by some cruel twist of fate, was trapped in its ever-widening wake. Days bled into weeks. The silence became a grotesque rhythm in the symphony of the city, a lurking predator I could never quite predict. Each episode was longer, the silence deeper, as if it were sinking its teeth into the world a little more each time. I stopped looking at the clock. What was time but a tormentor, reminding me of the inevitable. The newspapers, always eager to latch onto a good scare, were filled with theories, mass hysteria, government experiments, even talk of extraterrestrials. But I'd seen the look in the eyes of the woman with the teddy bear, heard the tremor in Mr. Henderson's voice when he asked if anyone had turned in a left shoe, size 12. This wasn't some scientific anomaly, some explainable blip in the system. This was something old, something hungry. Then one evening, just as the last of the commuters scurried out, leaving behind the usual hush of closing time, it hit me. The air thickened, a cold fist squeezing the air from my lungs. The gaslights overhead flickered, casting the station in a sickly yellow light. I was alone, except for old Maria, the cleaning lady, pushing her cart down the far end of the hall. She stopped, her eyes widening as the silence descended like a suffocating blanket. For a heartbeat, our eyes met, and a silent agreement passed between us. We both knew. The shadows in the corners, always deeper in this part of the station, seemed to twist, to coil in on themselves, as if something were breathing life into them. Maria whimpered, a thin, reedy sound quickly swallowed by the oppressive silence. Her cart clattered to the floor, scattering its contents. Feather dusters, bottles of cleaning solution, like offerings to some malevolent god. And then I saw it. This time, it wasn't a fleeting glimpse, a trick of the light and shadow. The figure emerged from the gloom, slow and deliberate, its form solidifying with a terrifying clarity that sent a jolt of pure primal fear through me. It was taller than any man had a right to be, its limbs impossibly long and thin, twisted at unnatural angles. Its skin was the color of ash, stretched taut over bones that protruded at sharp angles, like a skeleton barely contained by its own skin. But it was the eyes, or where the eyes should have been, that froze my blood. Empty sockets, black and bottomless, stared back at me, and I swear, I felt something inside me wither, shrivel up like a spider tossed into a flame. Those empty eyes saw everything, and nothing, all at once. They were the absence of hope, the embodiment of the silence. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but stand there like a statue, but my body refused to obey. I was rooted to the spot, every instinct screaming at me to flee, every muscle locked in place. The figure took a step closer, and the air grew thick, heavy. I felt a pressure in my skull, like a building wave. A low hum that seemed to resonate deep within my bones, vibrating in the hollow spaces of my being. And that's when I understood. It wasn't just the absence of sound. The figure was the silence, a void, a rip in the fabric of reality. And it was reaching for me. They never found Maria. One minute she was there, her kind, wrinkled face etched with the same terror that froze my own heart. The next, gone, vanished, swallowed whole by the silence like a pebble in a well. The police, they came and went, their questions like the sharp edges of broken glass. Didn't believe me, of course. The ramblings of an old man, they said. His mind addled by too many years, too many lost things. Mass hysteria, they called it, or a gas leak, always a gas leak. But their eyes, they flicked to the shadows, lingered a little too long on the spot where Maria had stood. They felt it too, the wrongness. The world shrunk to the size of my booth, the familiar clutter of lost umbrellas and mismatched gloves suddenly cold, menacing. Every creak of the station, every flicker of the gaslights sent a shiver down my spine. The silence hadn't just taken Maria. It had taken my peace, my sleep, my sanity. The nights were the worst. Dreams, dark and viscous, clung to me like cobwebs. The figure, its hollow sockets burning into my soul. Maria's muffled screams echoing around it like a chorus of the damned. I'd wake in a cold sweat, my heart a drum solo in my chest, the taste of fear thick on my tongue. Days blurred into weeks, each one a hammer blow, a terrifying countdown to the next wave of silence. I stopped going home. My little apartment felt like a tomb, the walls closing in, the only sounds the phantom echoes of a life fading from memory. The station, for all its horrors, became my prison and my refuge. The familiar faces, even Mr. Henderson with his endless quest for a missing sock, became my lifeline, a twisted sort of comfort in a world gone mad. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Weeks crawled by, then months. The silence receded, a nightmare fading with the morning light. The city exhaled, a collective sigh of relief that rippled through the streets. People started to forget, to laugh a little louder, to embrace a little tighter. The world went back to normal, or as normal as it could be in a city that never sleeps. But not me. I was a man haunted, living on borrowed time. I could still feel the echo of those empty sockets staring into my soul, feel the chill of the silence clinging to me like a shroud. They may have forgotten, but I knew better. The silence wasn't gone, just dormant, waiting, gathering its strength for something far worse. Spring arrived, hesitant at first, like a flower pushing through the grime of winter. Even here, in the heart of the city, the change was felt. People shed their heavy coats, their faces losing that hard, wary edge they'd carried for months. Even Mr. Henderson, my personal nemesis of the lost and found, seems to have forgotten about his damn socks. Now, he grumbled about the price of tomatoes. For a while, I let myself believe it, let myself sink into the illusion. Maybe, just maybe, the worst was over. Maybe life, stubborn as a weed, would find a way to choke out the darkness. It was a foolish hope. The first sign, almost easy to miss, was the quiet in the park across from the station. The usual symphony of chirping sparrows, their melodies as familiar to me as the city's grown, was thinner. One less voice in the choir. Then, a day later, The pigeons that usually flocked on the station ledge were gone. Vanished. Told myself it was nothing. Told myself I was just jumpy. My senses overloaded after months of living on the razor's edge of fear. But the world outside my window grew steadily quieter. The comforting rhythm of nature. The pulse of life that had always thrummed beneath the city's noise was fading, like a heart slowing, each beat weaker than the last. The newspapers, always hungry for a story, even a bad one, were full of it now. Disappearing wildlife. Dead zones, they called them, springing up all over the countryside. Places where animals went silent, then vanished. The experts, baffled, spouted their theories. Disease, migration patterns. Some even blamed it on the Russians. But their words were just noise. Empty chatter that did nothing to soothe the growing unease in my gut. I knew the truth. It wasn't some natural phenomenon, some explainable mystery. The silence wasn't contained to Grand Central Station anymore. It was spreading outwards, a stain on the fabric of reality, devouring everything in its path. One bright afternoon, a young boy, no older than 10, wandered into the lost and found. His face was streaked with tears, his small hands clutching a wooden birdhouse, the kind my grandfather used to make. "Mister," he said, his voice thick with tears, "have you seen my robin? He won't sing anymore." The boy's grief, so pure and raw, was a punch to the gut. I saw myself in his tear-filled eyes. The same fear, the same desperate hope for an answer I didn't have. The silence was no longer a local nightmare, a shared delusion. It was a plague, relentless and ever-growing, and I was just a witness to its devastation. The robin, Maria, the unnatural stillness creeping over the city, just the first drops of rain before the storm. And I, the keeper of lost things, was powerless to stop it. The air was thick and tasted of metal, like the smell of a struck match, a scent I hadn't noticed in years but now couldn't forget. A pressure built in my ears, the way they'd pop in a tunnel. But I was going nowhere, trapped in a city about to be swallowed whole. My heart hammered out a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a prisoner begging to be heard. Around me, the city, oblivious, kept spinning. A symphony of noise and movement about to have its plug pulled. The old clock tower, its face swallowed by an unnatural gloom that had settled over the city like a shroud, chimed 8 times. 8 o'clock. Each clang echoed in the hollow spaces of my mind. A morbid countdown. This time was different. This time it wasn't a ripple, a tremor in the fabric of things. This was the earthquake. The first tendrils of silence, icy fingers creeping across the station floor, stole the warmth from the air. Silenced the usual din of Grand Central. Commuters froze mid-stride, their faces twisting from smiles to bewildered confusion, then stark terror. Their eyes, wide with a dawning understanding that defied words, darted around, searching for an escape that wasn't there. We were all rats in a cage, and the trapdoor was about to spring. Then, with a final gut-wrenching lurch, the silence slammed down. Total. Absolute. It was a physical presence, pressing against my eardrums, stealing the air from my lungs, forcing its way down my throat like a mouthful of ice water. The ever-present gaslights, usually comfort, flickered, casting grotesque dancing shadows on the walls, taunting me. But it was the shadows behind the shadows I feared, the ones that seemed to writhe and pulse with a life of their own. Even the darkness offered no solace. Not this time. The figure emerged from the gloom, slow and deliberate, at the far end of the station, where the tracks disappeared into the tunnel, as if it were a conductor emerging from the belly of some monstrous subterranean beast. Its form, no longer a fleeting phantom, solidified with terrifying clarity, every detail etched onto my mind with an ice pick, taller than any man had a right to be. Limbs elongated and impossibly thin, twisted at angles that defied nature. It moved with an unnerving grace, gliding towards me across the polished floor. And those eyes, or rather, where eyes should have been, 2 empty sockets, black and bottomless, fixed on me. Not seeing me, not in a way that made sense, but consuming me, drinking in my terror like a man dying of thirst. This time, I wouldn't cower. This time I would meet the silence head-on. I gripped the old brass bell from my counter. It was cold in my trembling hand, the familiar weight both a comfort and a mockery. I stepped out from the flimsy sanctuary of the lost and found booth, each step an echo in the deafening silence. The figure paused, its grotesque head tilting slightly, like a dog hearing a whistle for the first time. And then, from the depths of the silence, I heard it. A voice, raspy and ancient, slithering through the empty spaces of the station, echoing in the hollow spaces of my mind. It whispered my name. The silence had teeth. It had sunk them into the world, taken a bite, and found it wanting. Now, it was slowly chewing, savoring the taste of fear and confusion. The echo of that voice, my name ripped from its throat, still rattled around in my skull, a chilling souvenir. I lay there on the cold, unforgiving floor of Grand Central, the brass bell still clutched in my hand. It felt strangely weightless, useless, a child's toy. Around me, the station was a symphony of the dazed and the disoriented. People were slowly picking themselves up, their faces pale, their eyes vacant, reflecting the abyss they'd just glimpsed. Some were weeping, their sobs sharp and thin in the returning sounds of the city. Others just stood there, swaying slightly, like trees in the aftermath of a storm that ripped away the very air they needed to breathe. I envied them. Their minds, even if clouded with terror, would eventually patch over the holes, find ways to explain away the unexplainable. Me? I was left with the memory of those empty sockets, the rasping voice that felt like sandpaper on my soul. I was a witness now, cursed with the knowledge of what lurked beneath the surface of things. The city, like a machine thrown back together with broken gears and stripped screws, sputtered back to life. The cacophony of traffic, the murmur of 1,000 conversations, it all felt strained, off-key. The normalcy was a facade, a thin, brittle sheet of ice over a dark and bottomless lake. The birds still hadn't returned. Not a single sparrow, not a single pigeon dared to break the uneasy truce. Laughter, once a familiar melody in the heart of the city, now felt forced, hollow. Conversations were punctuated by long, uncomfortable pauses, filled with unspoken questions and knowing glances. We were all living in the aftermath of an explosion, picking up the pieces of our shattered realities, pretending the world hadn't shifted on its axis. But it had, and the epicenter was right here, in the haunted silence of Grand Central Station. The police, those stalwart guardians of order, were clueless. Mass hysteria, they concluded, their voices just a bit too loud, their eyes darting nervously into the shadows. But I saw the doubt lurking beneath the surface. The way their hands hovered near their holsters, the telltale signs of men who'd stared into the abyss and weren't sure they'd come back whole. They felt it too, the lingering wrongness, the unspoken knowledge that the world was no longer the safe and predictable place they'd believed it to be. I returned to my post at the lost and found, an automaton drawn back to its designated spot on the assembly line. What else was I to do? This place, once a refuge from the storm of life, now felt like a tomb. The lost umbrellas, the mismatched gloves, the forgotten books, all testaments to the fragility of life, the ease with which it could be snuffed out, leaving behind only an echoing void. I was the keeper of lost things, forever haunted by the knowledge that we were all just one heartbeat away from joining them. The silence never really left. It hung around like the ghost of a bad smell, a faint ringing in your ears that you couldn't quite place. The city had gone back to its usual hustle and bustle, but I was stuck in the echo of that encounter, the memory of that figure, the rasp of that voice whispering my name like a threat. One afternoon, Mr. Henderson shuffled over to my booth. He wasn't bellowing about his socks for once, just stood there, looking like he'd aged 10 years since the last time I'd seen him. He was clutching this worn-out, leather-bound book, the kind that looked like it had been through a war, pages dry and yellowed like old bones. Found this in the usual jumble, he mumbled, pushing it towards me. Figured you might know about this kind of thing. He didn't need to say more. We both knew what kind of thing. Took the book, its cover cold and smooth as a tombstone. No title, no markings, nothing to distinguish it from 1,000 other discarded things, except for the way it felt in my hands, like holding something alive. Opened it up, and a wave of dizziness hit me. the same way it did when the silence was about to fall. The pages were filled with this crazy, swirling script, like something you'd see on a crypt wall, all faded ink and cryptic symbols. Couldn't read a lick of it, but a cold fist clenched around my gut anyway. It was the language of the silence. I knew it. The voice given form. My hand was shaking so bad I almost dropped the damn thing as I turned the page. And that's when I saw it. A drawing. Just a simple one, but it hit me like a punch to the gut. The figure. Those empty sockets burned into me. Its stick-thin limbs reaching out from the page like it was trying to claw its way out of hell and into the world. And underneath, scrawled in a shaky hand, one word. Listen. That's when the city around me started to fade. Not all at once, like before, but slowly. Like someone was turning down the volume on the world. Mr. Henderson's voice, the rumble of the subway beneath our feet, the distant sirens that were the city's constant song. It all went fuzzy, distant, but it wasn't silent. Not exactly. It was like everything was muffled, like I was hearing the world through a thick wall of cotton. I wasn't remembering the silence. I was hearing it again, but this time, it wasn't the city that was being silenced. It was me. The book slipped from my grasp, the pages fluttering closed like a raven's wings. I reached out for Mr. Henderson, a desperate plea forming on my lips, but the words wouldn't come. He was looking at me, his face etched with confusion, his voice a distant buzzing I couldn't quite make out. Then his eyes widened in alarm as I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came out, just a faint wheeze escaping my throat, lost in the growing silence that had swallowed me whole. I was trapped inside my own personal void, the city swirling around me, oblivious and indifferent to my plight. And the last thing I saw before the silence swallowed me whole was the look on Mr. Henderson's face. It wasn't fear. It was pity.